Well, earlier today, Trade and Industry as well as Competition Minister Park Stau said he'd noted with concern an earlier decision by the United States to impose a 25% tariff on imports of vehicles and parts that could negatively impact just over $2 billion worth of South African automobile exports to the United States. Let's go to the US now, get your live update. Bring in SABC correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joining us from New York tonight. Sherwin, always good to see you. First things first, what more does Minister Stau's statement actually say, and what might it mean for South Africa's trade relationship with Washington, considering that the US administration has said that these new tariffs will go even beyond the countries that have some sort of exemption, i.e. AGOA?
Well, the $2 billion, Tembekile, that you refer to is under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, so shaky as she goes in terms of these tariffs. And Park Stau apparently taking almost a week to digest these automobile and auto parts tariffs that were announced by President Trump almost a week ago. He notes the decision with concern to impose the 25% tariff on imports of automobiles and certain automobile parts to address what the United States has labeled in terms of their national security interests. These tariffs are supposed to go in on Thursday, April 3rd, after the day of liberation that it will be announced tomorrow. Park Stau says that the tariffs applied to foreign imports of steel and aluminium nullified the preferences of those goods under Sub-Sahara's preference in terms of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. He says that, therefore, based on that perspective, tariffs on automobiles and automobile parts will also apply to imports of these products from AGOA beneficiary countries, including South Africa. Automobile exports from South Africa accounted for 64% of South Africa's exports under AGOA. That's the $2+ billion amount. He goes on to then talk about how South Africa will be seeking a meeting with the United States authorities to discuss these developments, given the potential negative effect on the South African economy. And as you well know, seeking a meeting and getting a meeting in the current political climate between Washington and Pretoria are two different things.
And just on Washington then, curious but not surprising is the fact that the announcement by Trump of the tariff decision tomorrow is only expected to happen after markets have closed.
Correct, yeah, and so two scenarios, right? They might be wanting to avoid a bloodbath on the markets tomorrow, or they're still grappling with how and exactly how these tariffs are going to be implemented. Let me give you some background here. So initially, this was supposed to be reciprocal tariffs. So the argument from the Trump administration was, if you tariff us, we will tariff you commensurately, right? So in a tit-for-tat way. What we are also understanding is that Treasury Secretary and economic officials in the Trump administration have been making the case that between 10 and 15 countries would essentially be targeted in this announcement tomorrow. The president then upending this in comments on Air Force One on Sunday, returning from Mar-a-Lago to Washington, D.C., where he said the tariffs would be much broader than that and apply to all nations. The Wall Street Journal, Tembekile, reports this week that the Trump administration is, quote, scrambling to determine the specifics of its new tariffs ahead of this self-imposed deadline tomorrow. And what they report is that there's consideration being given to imposing a global tariff of up to 20% that would virtually hit all trading partners, or then, additionally, the reciprocal tariffs, the tit-for-tat tariffs, as the Trump administration has framed them, that could include countries where there is a trade deficit between that country and the United States. So you can get a broad tariff, you can get a tit-for-tat tariff, but you can also get a tariff if there is a trade deficit, as we pointed out in that package. Use the example of South Africa that enjoys a $8 billion plus trade deficit with the United States. So South Africa should just assume that they will be within the lager that the Trump administration will target tomorrow. So we don't know exactly the details of what Trump will announce when the markets close tomorrow, but it could be anything. It could be all of this, or it could be one or the other. We just don't know.
And various leaders right across the world, Sherwin, then are preparing themselves to the extent to which that is even possible at this point. Tariffs aren't a one-way street, as we know, and the European Union has in fact said that it holds quite a few cards itself. How will that bode for the relationship between themselves and Washington? They're already in choppy waters as is.
Well, look at the examples that came early in these tariffs debate, right? The targets were Canada, the targets were Mexico, and they certainly didn't keel over. They pushed back, and so you saw waivers and concessions, and the conversation continued. You saw Ursula von der Leyen there, the European Commission president, talking about how their posture is certainly primed to respond here. You're seeing reports out of China that new supply chains between South Korea and Japan, these are historic sort of not foes, not really allies in the traditional sense. They are now talking about closer economic cooperation. You heard what the EU has said. And so the idea that Trump is just going to act here unilaterally and not get a response is certainly not borne out in what we have seen to date. But in addition to that, we are going to see some choppy waters here. The markets will respond. There's going to be a great deal of uncertainty as to how these tariffs are going to be implemented. It's going to take time for them to crystallize. There might be waivers and concessions. You're hearing certain countries saying they might be seeking certain concessions. We're hearing countries talking about greater investments in the United States to offset the notion of tariffs. And then in addition to that, Israel has just announced, I saw a headline on Fox News just before this live, has announced that it's canceling all tariffs on U.S. products to avoid reciprocal tariffs from the United States. So that might be an example of where countries might move here.
We're seeing what has been suggested by some, that because Trump is viewed as a very transactional head of state, countries may even to some degree have to resort to offering him sweeteners, if you will, ahead of the announcement so he could, shall we say, have mercy on them tomorrow.
Absolutely right. This is a tool of leverage for the Trump administration, as you correctly point out. This is a transactional president. So what can countries give him to offset the imposition of these tariffs? Look, this is a complex, complicated economic question. It's not just if you do this, we'll do that. These are complicated economic discussions that need to happen at the highest level. And as you have heard from South Africa's Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Park Stow, they want to talk with the United States. The question is, can they get a meeting?
Sherwin Bryce-Pease, we wait to see if that will happen. Sherwin, a man in New York, reporting as we wait for that announcement by the Trump administration on what it will do regarding the tariff announcement tomorrow. Department of International Relations officials also going to meet with senior U.S. Department officials we're expecting soon. As and when that happens, SABC News will bring you all the latest lines.